that I'm going to try as much as possible to go deep into it in my next slide. Okay, the recording has begun for P's and G's. Let's proceed. So I was talking about compliance matters, and I mentioned OHS, I mentioned insurances, I mentioned environmental, and any other insurances like your labor compliances and everything else. All of those will be covered under P's and G's. And then management team cost, obviously under running costs, as I mentioned. Then ensure all indirect costs are covered under P's and G's. When we say indirect, remember, this is a very, very instructive example, or rather description of P's and G's. P's and G's are indirect cost of a business. So what effectively it means is that whether you are dealing with production or not, P's and G's need to be paid. Whether your team is doing excavations today and tomorrow decides to sit down and they sit for, let's say, 2 weeks without working and everything else, P's and G's are compulsory. So that, in essence, is what it means by an indirect cost. A direct cost in basic classical business definition is any cost that you can relate and trace back to production. That is a direct cost. So that is the difference. Let's take an example. Site manager. Which production activity can you trace a site manager? Let's build on Smoo's example. Smoo was doing excavations, then he did pipe laying, then he did manholes, then he did bedding, then he did backfilling. A site manager, which cost are you going to relate him to? You can't in terms of the production cost. Why? Because they are spread across the entire project. So what you do is you make sure that they are priced under P's and G's. Now, that is a very simple litmus test that you need to check whether or not an item is under P's and G's or not. If you cannot trace it back to any production, then it must go to P's and G's, right? Let's look at another example of direct cost now, which is your production cost. Let's look at your artisan, typically your pipe layer or your plumber. Again, sticking to Smoo's example. If you're doing pipe laying, and when the guys are done with pipe laying, they do backfill, they do bedding, they finish up site. If you want to trace the cost in terms of production of a plumber, or rather a pipe layer, you can simply trace it back to pipe laying. So you can see direct cost, you can trace it back. Indirect cost, you can spread it. You can't trace it, but you can spread it across the entire project. That's how you must think about it. Even insurance, you can't say I'm insuring excavations only, and I'm not insuring pipe laying and backfilling and testing and commissioning. You are insuring everything else. So that's what it means by indirect cost. So that's how you must remember P's and G's. Anything that you cannot trace it back to production trades, it falls under P's and G's. All that is required for you to get up and start your project before you even do production, that must be under P's and G's. And when you price it, make sure you identify those. And if you don't, make sure that you account for them as you are pricing P's and G's. So that's the long and short of it. Let's go to detailed examples now and explanations. Cool. So we talked about P's and G's. We said preliminary items are those items in the schedule of quantities which no quantity can be realistically fixed. I just explained that. In business terms, these are called indirect costs, necessary for managing and supporting production, however, cannot be traced to an actual production unit. Right. Second point there, have no relation to the amount of work to be done. Although one can argue that, oh, wait a minute, if the amount of work to be done is, let's say, instead of 100 meters of pipe, I'm laying a kilometer of pipe, and a kilometer of pipe can take me X amount of months, and my time-related costs are this much. So therefore, they are informed by the duration or the length of that. So you can argue it like that, but in classical terms, they are not related. As in, if they stop working, you still carry on paying the P's and G's until obviously the end of the project. They are priced both as time-based, lump sum, and value-based, which I explained in the previous slides. Can sometimes make or break the profit margin. Just want to pause and emphasize on that. If you are working on a project and you have resources that support the project, and you have not priced them under P's and G's, those resources, you better believe, are eating on your profit margin, because there is nowhere else that those resources are budgeted for. It's as simple as that. You've got yourself, let's say you're a small business owner. We call you categorically a contracts manager because you are signing contracts, you're dealing with the client, you're following up on payments. You must be included in P's and G's. Site manager must be included. Site clerk must be included. Oh, by the way, if you have offices, head offices, as well as someone who's assisting every now and then, but not directly on site, you need to account for them there. Failure to do that, obviously, will result in your profit margins being negatively impacted, because that is where the money is going to come from. The other point is they cannot be the same from project to project and company to company. We just mentioned it. The salary of a foreman in my company can vary differently from the salary of a foreman with the same experience doing the same project in another company, because it depends on my relationship with my foreman, it depends on my relationship with my staff, and how I'm managing that relationship effectively. So under P's and G's, it can vary from company to company as well as project to project. Let's talk about project to project example. Say, for example, I just mentioned right now that a project which is 100-kilometer pipeline versus a 100-meter pipeline, you can clearly tell that the P's and G's of those two different projects will vary. So make it a point that you always look at the works to be done, look at the duration of the project, and then allocate P's and G's accordingly. Last point on that, different specifications allocate P's and G's in their own unique way. We just mentioned it. SABS 1200, I know that in Namibia you've got something similar. Colto, I know that in Namibia you've got something similar. And then standard system of measurements that is used across Africa. So we find that one from ASAQS, Association of Southern African Quantity Surveyors. We can get that one. It gives us standard system of measurements, which is used basically in the whole of the SADC region. And I'm sure that most of us here are in the SADC region. So that was just highlighting key points regarding P's and G's. Let's proceed. So we talked about fixed related charges. We talked about time related charges. We talked about value related charges. Fixed one, once off, right? You purchase something, you mobilize to site. When you are done, you demobilize. That's an example. Time related, your running costs, we just mentioned it. Wages, equipment, rent comes under that category. Value related charges, your insurances based on the contract value, right? Obviously, an insurance of 100 million can be different from an insurance of 10 million or 100,000. All of that, insurances, your guarantees based on the value of words. That's, in simple terms, that's what it is. Before I proceed there, you'll realize that sometimes when they price P's and G's, or rather when they structure P's and G's, they will have fixed related items, then they will have what we call contractual obligations. You must make sure that you price that one, because when I come in as an engineer or as a QS, and now I'm trying to manage your work, I'll tell you that, listen, contractual obligation as per JBCC. I'll go to JBCC and list all the contractual obligations that are required for this contract. And I'll say, please account for this, please make all of this available. And if you don't, you know when you're going to get your money from, your profit margins. Very important. Time-related charges, also contractual obligations are there. Value-related charges, very important. Your contractual obligations are there. Because what it does is, a smart QS or an engineer, consulting engineer, when they put together P's and G's, they'll always have contractual obligations, and they'll always refer you to a particular contract that they are using. What that does is, it makes sure that your BOQ is governed by a certain contract, and it gives you, as well as them, the right to go to that contract and ask for certain things based on those contracts. So please pay attention to that, because that can catch us off guard. Cool. So let's give a list of examples. I've been obviously explaining them, but I'm going to explain them further. So definitions and interpretations, documents, previous works, or adjoining properties, the site. So these are factors now that affect P's and G's. Management of the contract, sample or shop drawings, deposit and fees, temporary services, prime cost amounts, attendance on subcontractors, very important, particularly for building works, guarantees and insurances. Just by reading this, you can clearly tell that whoever was putting together this example is a building works quantity surveyor. Because the minute you have shop drawings, attendance to subcontractors, and all of the like, deposit and fees, you'll realize that that is predominantly, but not exclusively, applicable to general building contracts. There's a note at the bottom. The list will vary depending on the project category, like we explained, and also the type of specification that is used, which is, or contract that is used, right? NEC, GCC, JPCC, FIDIC, etc. That we must pay attention to. Cool. So I know that it's a lot, but there are key focus areas that we want you to, at the very minimum, be awoke to and pay attention to. What is your site management cost? You cannot afford to avoid that or to underprice on that, because these are your foremen, these are your contracts manager, and this is you. If you're running a small business, your salary comes from here. It does not come from your profit margin. Your profit margin is only for your company and your company alone, not you. Site running costs, we just talked about it. Accommodation, water and electricity. Site security, we talked about it. OHS and EMP compliance, we talked about it. Guarantees and insurances, we talked about it. And then attendance on subcontractors, we talk about it. So I think what we need to do now, can we take some examples so that we can see how this works? So let's go to examples. Site management cost. This cost will be incurred by the company for site supervision and project management. To price this correctly, we need to know the duration of the project and list of team that will be employed in that project. In addition to wages, we need to know what additional costs will be incurred when calling such teams. For example, traveling time, vehicle costs, rental accommodation, cell phone allowances, which will be given. Right, let's take an example. You have your project manager, you can pay them a salary of 30,000. Site agent, you pay them a salary of 20,000. Site supervisor, a salary of 18,000. Administrator, you pay them a salary of 12,000. Then accommodation for the whole team, 10,000. Now imagine this brings you to 90,000 rand a month or dollars a month. Now imagine if you omit any of these guys, or rather omit any of this in budgeting. And now you get to site, you need those guys. The impact that it will have on you is tremendous. I don't even have to explain it. It's there. You can actually read it yourself. So let's expand further on it, on the bullets below. These are costs that will be incurred by the company for site supervision and project management. To price this correctly, we need to know the duration of the project and the list of teams that will be employed in that project. Also, it varies. If you're a small business, you can have a contracts manager, which is you, and your site foreman, done. Accommodation as well, right? If you are, let's say, a medium-sized company dealing with a medium-sized project, you need a contracts manager, you need a site agent, you need a foreman. Maybe you can squeeze in an administrator, but obviously accommodation. Then if it's a complex project, there are times where you have at least 3 project managers building, let's say, 100 million rand hospital, $100 million hospital. 3 project managers. One deals with civil works, one deals with building works, one deals with specialist services, electrical, mechanical, health-related stuff. Under that, you will have 3 site agents, 3 site foremen specializing in civil works, concrete works, you name it. It can vary from project to project, company to company, and size to size, right? I just gave you a rundown of those examples over there. In addition to wages, we need to know what additional cost. We talked about rental, we talked about cell phone allowance, as well as traveling time. So that's just an example of things that you need to take into account when you are calculating site management costs. Site running costs, this would be water, electricity, ablution, and welfare facilities, as well as communication facilities. So an example of this would be your water. It can run at 3,500 a month, electricity 5,000 a month, ablution and welfare facilities 4,500 a month, communication facilities 2,500 a month. And we know that data is expensive, so that price over there is not unusual. You put that together, easily makes 15,500. Multiply it over 6 months, you get 93,000. That you can clearly tell that it can create a dent in your profit margin if you don't budget it very well. So all of these must be taken into account. Although I must say, you can negotiate with water, you can negotiate with electricity, but at the very minimum, these are the things that you must actively consider when you are pricing P's and G's, insofar as running costs are concerned. Site security, we talked about that, but let's expand on it. You're protecting the works.
There's a hand up. I'm not sure if you've realized.
No, I haven't. Ashley, go for it.
Oh, no, thank you, sir. No, that was been a while. I think previously then you came with all this, so it started making sense. Because it was about when you are a small business, on what are the charges you need to charge, and now you're making it go more specific into it, what charges you need to consider. So I'm sorted for now.
Okay, cool. So it means that I answered you using the examples, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you. I'm glad that we're getting value. Where are we? Okay, cool. So let's talk about site security. We mentioned it previously. We talked about you must protect your works against theft, against anything else. You must make sure that the section that you've occupied, obviously you've protected them, because remember, these works are yours until you hand over to the client. So if anything happens, you can't go to the client, because the client will say, but hey, hang on, I told you about security, and it's there under the light item site security under P's and G's, and you've claimed for it. But if you don't make it on site, available on site, it's your call. This will include site fencing or site barricade and full-time security for the duration of project, I just explained. We can assume that site personnel will cost you 35 grand per month for 6 months, then we'll spend easily 210,000 rand for the duration of a project. Now, again, it goes back to my previous examples. This will vary from site to site. This will vary from project to project. This will vary from company to company. But however, you need to actively think about such issues because they affect your P's and G's. Then the last point there, based on previous experience, we can make an assumption that to erect 1 kilometer site fence can be 100 grand, including removal upon completion. This was just an example that was made there. But the emphasis is really on ensuring that you've got site security, you're protecting your works against theft or anything else, and you're making sure that you've adequately provisioned for them under P's and G's. OHS and EMP compliance. Again, one of my favorites. Each and every project needs an OHS and of lately EMP compliance. You cannot do anything without that. Construction is one of the most dangerous industries across all industries globally. So you need to make sure that your OHS is there. I know when we're starting out, we are small guys. We can get away with a couple of things, but as soon as your company grows and you start tackling bigger projects, you start realizing that this, in fact, is very important. You study your construction regulations, they will tell you that this is important. You study your OHS Act, you realize that this is very important. Each and every project, this is very important. I'll mention something 2-3 days ago, I think it was a Tuesday. Yeah, it was a Tuesday. We were submitting building BOQs to a client of ours in Joburg, facilities management. So it was 6 facilities, and the client was trying to cut down on costs because we gave them estimated BOQs for him to then open up for tender so that they can allow contractors to actually price. So we came in with our engineers or our QS cost estimate, and we looked at P's and G's. And I mentioned a couple of things that, hey, I think the P's and G's are a bit high. I know that we've got an item like this. Can you please replace it with this? I know that we've got this item. Can you please replace it with this? However, what I really emphasized on is there shall be no compromise when it comes to OHS and EMP, specifically for building works, especially if a building is occupied. And even if it's not occupied, The fact of the matter is that anything can fall from you when you're dealing with a building. You need to make sure that you observe all OHS protocol. You need to make sure that all your guys are compliant, and you need to make sure that you do your, obviously, toolbox talks. You make sure that you write your OHS hazards, risk, incident reports, report fatalities, and obviously wherever you can prevent them as much as possible. Whether you're working in a building that is occupied or in a building that you are erecting from ground up, that is absolutely essential. You cannot make a mistake here, because a mistake here can be fatal. In other words, people can die. So you cannot say, oh, OHS, I don't need an OHS, I'm gonna, make a plan. No, please, very important. Also occurring under P's and G's. Guarantees and insurances, we talked about that. You need to protect and insure your client's work, right? So this is not a matter of a choice. This is a matter of necessity. We know what happened in KZN. I know my Namibian guys sometimes from time to time see the news, what happened in KZN. It happened right now, KZN floods, I think in April, May. Imagine we were doing a project there in KZN, and a contractor was doing a road for us, and they had laid, I think, one layer. So they did box cutting, they went on the road bed, they came with a dump rock, and then as they were doing now their, I think, G7 or G6 layer, the rain came flooding and washed away most of their material. And guess what happened? Very interesting. So we said, okay, let's look at our BOQ. We've got guarantees and we've got insurances we've allowed for. You've priced for it. And in fact, in the previous certificate, you've claimed for them. So therefore, we are now going to just facilitate the process of you claiming from your insurer. The guy said, okay, initially, but I think 2 weeks later, they came back saying that, no, maybe it's because of the design. We said it's got nothing to do with the design. This is a natural disaster of which you were meant to be protected against. It's there and it's outlined under general conditions of contract, which is the GCC that we were using. And we quoted all the subsequent clauses that supported our statement. And we told them, that said, please claim from your insurance and redo the work, because we've budgeted for such conditions. Now, think about it. If the contractor truly had budgeted for this, and now they're disputing it, one of two things are potentially happening. One, maybe they lied about insuring the works, but they claimed for it. Or two, maybe the insurance is quite excessive, so maybe the excess amount that is required before the claim is ran is quite big, so therefore they can afford it. So they're trying to find a way of making us, together with our client, pay. And we refused that because we know that the works have been covered under P's and G's, specifically guarantees and insurances. So that's why I thought I would emphasize that, because sometimes we take it for granted, but disasters happen, and disasters now are becoming very, very frequent. Climate change, we know. Weather changes, we know. So anything can happen at any point in time. So please keep that in mind. Right. Attendance to subcontractors. Basically, we talked about building works contractors here. So specialist attendance like unloading, storing, placing, and positioning, providing special power supplies, specific hoisting, the use of crane and scaffolding requirements, and all of these administrative costs that are associated with attending to those specialist, to those specialist needs must be factored in. Carrying on with attendance to subcontractors, you need to establish a list of subcontractors that will be needed to complete the work. I think Mrs. Rido explained it very well. From the subcontractors you have established, you look at the service that they will be rendering and make a list of attendance that will be needed. Once a list of attendance is made, a list of other costs associated with that will be priced accordingly. Now to conclude. Very important, people take P's and G's for granted. Can make or break a project. And remember, if an item is there and you've underpriced it, it does not matter. You are compelled to fulfill that obligation, because remember, A project is a contract between you and your client. So therefore, you must price that carefully. You must price that applying all the thoughts and the examples that I've made here. From there on, you know that you are safe. Because if you have not priced it or you underpriced it, it will chow on your profit margins. So let's see how we are concluding here. Preliminaries and generals usually forgotten. Oh, yes. Preliminaries and generals are usually forgotten aspects of a tender as they have no direct role on the tender. I mentioned that, but they're very important. Second point, although they are indirectly affect the whole tender, if not well priced, they can be downfall of any company. Equally important, it is important to price them correctly and to ensure that you get all relevant input from relevant parties before you price. For example, insurances. In South Africa, we've got, just going to give you a quick plug here. In South Africa, we've got a website called Civil Shore, insurance company. You can go to Civil Shore and say a quick quote. You can actually put in whether it's new work or existing work. And you put in your estimated construction value, the duration, blah, 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 all of that, and press generate price. And then it will ask you whether you want a once-off or a continuous. If it's a once-off, it will give you a price. Then if it's a continuous, it will give you a month-to-month price. From then on, you already know exactly on this project, this is what I'm supposed to budget my premiums for insurances. And it can give you guarantees. It can give you all risk insurance. It can give you third-party protection. It gives you COIDA protection. All of that in one quote, quick one, directly from the system. Then you know how much you're going to pay. From then on, you add your profit margin, and therefore you can price the item under insurances. As simple and as easy as that. However, if you miss it, then you are in trouble. So I think that brings us to the end as it relates to P's and G's. These are just the references that we've used. And I'm going to take in questions and answers right now before we switch over to SPOO to complete pricing of P's and G's. Question, comments. I know it's the, what's the word? I know it's the afternoon drive. People are very tired, lots of information, but please, we'll appreciate comments, we'll appreciate questions to know that I'm not alone. I'm not talking to myself, I'm talking to people. So question, comments, compliment, criticism, we accept everything. This is a knowledge exchange session, and it's not a one way, just like Mr. Blessing said earlier on the day. I'll give us a minute or two. Okay, Alistair Ashley has a comment. I have just submitted 2 tenders for building works and only starting to realize that the PRM program is game changer for SMME. This is very, very appreciated by the team. They work very, very hard and long hours to make sure that we deliver value for all companies, specifically SMMEs and cost estimators in large companies that are struggling to price numerous rates. And we deliver them in a manner that is comprehensive and, most importantly, easy to understand and easy to use. because I think at the end of the day, you can have something comprehensive, but if it does not help you move faster, then it's of no value to you. So thank you for that. Maria Freedom, I really learned a lot. Thank you. Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. Thank you. I was afraid of P's and G's, I need to be honest, because I know that people get nervous when I talk about them. But I think I tried a different tactic of approaching it so that I make it simple. I use simple everyday language, and I make sure I touch on key points that people should take into account as they look at P's and G's. Alistair, go for it.
Yes, sir. Just one question. How do you deal with clients whenever you go to a site, do a site visitation and price them, and you want to add on all those P's and G's, depending on your company size, and yet they are complaining about because they think you're an SMME and they don't actually want to pay you for those P's and G's, like your insurances that you have to take out because you need to protect your business as much as you want to protect the work you are doing for your client, all that, but yet they don't see that. They see you in the context as a SMME. So in fact, they will start questioning you. Why do you have to charge P's and G's and all those type of things? How do you deal with such type of clients?
Okay, I'm going to answer you in two ways, right? Very, very, very beautiful question. Thank you for that. I'm going to answer you in twofold, right? The first one is during the pricing process, right? What you want to do, you want to be very tactical. You want to raise everything and make sure that you document it and you have paper trail, right? Now, they might not necessarily respond to you at that time, but then what you then proceed to doing, you proceed to price the work as per items that they have provided. Although in your paper trail, you've actually raised all of these things. Now, that's the first one. The second part about it is that now when you get awarded for the project, that's when you bring all of these things up. Then you ask the client, and I always want to use this particular approach. It works every time. So what if someone steals here? Who are you going to claim it from? What if there's bad weather and all the works are damaged? How am I going to recover that? Are you going to pay me again? You see what I mean? What if I need a competent foreman who's going to do quality work and you are not providing? Where am I going to pay my foreman? Because all the other items that are in production are actually for my general labor as well as my artisans, not my foreman. Who is going to run my site? You see what I mean? So you start asking it from that perspective. It is very practical. It is very instructive. And there's no way a client will avoid that. And when it does happen, when disaster strikes, you just put out your paper trail and start now contending it in that particular way.
Okay, now thank, because I currently sit with some typical issue or halfway with that issue in my electrical, where my electrical team, artisans are working, but currently strikes are causing, not due to us, but from the client side. Now my artisans are standing or staying at home. They can't work due to civil unrest. So it's now the question's been raised that when you called me in for this amount of days that I need to come and do your job, but now the scope has been changing. Who's responsible for that? Who's responsible for my standing time? Because when I charged you standing time, you said it wasn't necessary.
Great, sir. That's exactly how you need to approach it. That's exactly how you need to approach it. If the client does not delay, if you can prove beyond all reasonable doubt that all delays that you're experiencing are A, beyond your control, B, and most preferably the client's doings, then you have a leg to stand on.
Okay.
Thank you.
No, thanks. Thanks a lot.
No, I think with that said, I'm going to stop the recording right now, and then I'm going to allow Sbu to log in again on the system so that we can collectively price P's and G's together. And then from then on, we can wrap up the session. Thank you. Mr. Sbu, over to you. Can you log back in?
Yes. Thank you.